it will pull it up. And have you noticed I'm using a different way of listening to stuff now? I've got just one little flesh-colored, almost CIA agent-like thing in my ear rather than these things, which I've had for years and years and years. But I stick it behind my back, and sometimes it slides down and causes problems. Anyways, we're not supposed to tell things like that because we're so professional around here. And so, anyways. So we did this disputatio because Doug Wilson, back then, and he probably still is, I haven't seen him say much about it, but Doug Wilson was pushing the ecclesiastical text perspective. What's the ecclesiastical text perspective? Well, it's the idea that the Byzantine text, represented by the Textus Receptus, has been accepted by the church. Now, the irony here is that phrase, Textus Receptus, came from an advertisement. The Elzevir brothers in 1633, and advertisements back then used to be in Latin. And so they had come up with their own Greek text based upon Erasmus and Stephanos and Beza, and they're trying to sell it. And so in the advertisement, they use the phrase Textus Receptus, the received text. Well, this is an advertisement, for crying out loud. There was no council that said this is the received text. It happened to be the default text at the time because it's what they had. It was not like someone sat down and said, okay, we're going to select the Byzantine platform over against the Alexandrian. They didn't know what the Byzantine platform or the Alexandrian platform was. Erasmus had half a dozen manuscripts. He didn't even trust the best one that he had. It's so anachronistic, and yet you can make it sound so good. Well, this was the text of the reformers. Not purposefully, it wasn't. It was by default, but not by choice. And unfortunately, sometimes even Reformed folks prove themselves to be a little bit less than discerning on certain issues. There are certain things that Reformed folks can get into that are just sort of on the margins. They're just a little bit out there. This is one of them. There's another one I could mention that would get me in a lot of trouble. But and so Doug Wilson was presenting the ecclesiastical text. The church has accepted this text, and these modern eclectic texts, these modern textual critics, it's changing all the time. We need to have an unchanging standard. What they don't seem to realize is there is no one ecclesiastical text. There is no one Textus Receptus. There are 5 editions of Erasmus, one of Stephanos, actually Stephanos had more than one, but one popular one of Stephanos, one of Beza. They all differed from one another. And there are simply readings in the Textus Receptus that are absolutely indefensible. They are indefensible. And yet there are people that will overlook that and go, but it's better to have that unchanging standards. So I refer people to, and credenda.org, a book and channel just mentioned, it's still listed in their archives, and we got permission, so it's on our site as well, to be able to post that particular. It's in Twitter. I'm looking at Twitter. I don't see you on Twitter. You're not in my feed. I don't know why. I mean, I follow you, but I don't know why. It's not there. So you can pick it up in a number of different places. And the reality is, I think, I don't even think it was a close debate. Even if you only had 100. Once we got into specific texts, specifically Luke 2:22, the wheels fell out from under Doug Wilson's position, in my opinion. As long as you don't get specific, as long as you stay in generalities, it's easy to make that position sound good. There it is. Now I see it. It says 3 seconds ago. But once you, if you have a textual theory that cannot actually give you a text, that's not a good textual theory. And every time years and years ago, I took on Theodore Letus on this subject, who has since passed away in a car accident. Theodore Letus was a big ecclesiastical text guy. And there was this big, huge exchange we did back in the days of BBSs. I mean, it wasn't even on quote-unquote internet. And once you get into actually having to come up with a text and answer questions about specific verses, that's where what sounds like real nice theory just falls apart, because you can't do it. It doesn't allow you to actually practice textual criticism. And I guess you just have to say, well, whatever Erasmus did, whatever that Roman Catholic priest who wrote in defense of transubstantiation did, we're good with it. Okay, whatever. That's going to come out a little bit later on. But going back to Jude 5, what you have here would be a very clear reference to the deity of Christ. I mean, if it's Jesus who is taking a people out of Israel, out of Egypt, I'm sorry. Well, we know who did that. We know that was God that did that. If that's Jesus doing that, wow. Now, that's the reading. The term Jesus is found in Alexandrinus, in Vaticanus, 33, 81, 23, 44, a few others, and in some manuscripts of the Vulgate. That's the textual data on that particular. That's not a lot of sources, but that's very early sources. There's a major textual variant here, and I would never use Jude 5 as a primary evidence for the deity of Christ. Because it is a textual variant, it has to be put into that category where you note the variant and note, therefore, that its testimony has to be taken in light of the fact that there's a variation there. So you keep that in mind. But I say kudos to the ESV for anticipating what was coming in the Essay on 28th. And just simply on the basis of textual critical principles, it's hard to argue against the reading given its exceptionally primitive foundation. It'd be wonderful if we had some... we do have one papyri, P72. And it has a very interesting reading. It's Hati Theos Christos. The God